What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Supergirl, the new superhero film directed by Craig Gillespie. Of course, this is the second entry in the new DC universe from James Gunn and Peter Safran over at Warner Brothers. Of course, last year, this whole era really kicked off in earnest on the big screen with Superman, starring David Cornsweet as the Man of Steel. And Supergirl was, briefly introduced, her dog Crypto in particular, having a presence in that movie. And it's become quite clear, at least for the time being, that the James Gunn era at DC will be heavily Superman focused, with Superman Man of Tomorrow, a sequel to last year's Superman, coming next year. That'll be 3 Superman/Supergirl movies in 3 years. And of course, this new Supergirl film stars Milly Alcock in the title role of Kara Zor-El. That was a role that was hotly chased. There was a big audition process with Alcock coming out on top, which was a piece of casting I really liked and supported because, of course, Milly Alcock really came out of nowhere in a scene-stealing role in House of the Dragon Season 1, playing young Rhaenyra Targaryen. She was really tremendous on that show, in the half of the season that she got to portray the character, and having her really step up and take on a big title role like Supergirl seemed pretty exciting. And while Supergirl isn't a heavy hitter in DC to the same degree that, of course, a Batman or a Wonder Woman is, I do think there was a good amount of anticipation for this film given the very warm reception that Superman received last year. Superman, I thought, was a really effective Superman film and a really effective start to this new cinematic universe at DC, so I was definitely riding high off that film. Supergirl, unfortunately, wastes a lot of the momentum and goodwill from last year's Superman film. It's quite baffling to see DC under James Gunn take such a noticeable step back with the quality of this film. Supergirl comes across as a superhero film of the bygone era, a Marvel Phase 1 or Phase 2 film. The quality is just not where we expect things to be in the mid-2020s. I like Milly Alcock in the role, albeit this is the more anti-hero, rebellious side of Supergirl, a little less traditional, but she's far from the problem with the movie. Structure-wise, the film comes across as an insignificant side story, with the biggest sin of them all being the film's very poor villain, Krem of the Yellow Hills, played by Matthias Schoenhartz. There's really just not a lot here. The introduction of Jason Momoa's Lobo comes across as very extraneous and shoehorned in, and frankly, Momoa's performance is a bit broad and uninspiring. But really, it's just an uninspiring film in the sense that there's no standout set piece. There's no wow moment in this movie. It's often visually very nondescript. Young Eve Ridley as Ruthie also struggles with some of the dialogue at times. Does this film effectively set up Supergirl moving forward for this DC universe? I suppose. But the brilliance of Superman 2025 was that we didn't waste time watching Clark Kent become Superman. He already was Superman. And in this film, we're watching Kara slowly find her desire to become heroic. It's just not that interesting, at least as a starting place. And I think this idea of watching Kara go to a different planet that doesn't have a yellow sun, thus not really giving her the Kryptonian superpowers we associate with the Superman, Supergirl, I think that's a fun concept to play with moving forward. Watching her go to a planet with a red sun so she can drink alcohol and actually get drunk because her powers are suppressed. I think that's a cool idea, right? And I think that's a cool idea to see played with kind of in the middle once you've had more time with the character. I just don't know if we get enough out of it with it being our starting place. But very early on, I was starting to get concerned just because the introduction of Krem as this big bad, the leader of the brigands, basically these space pirates that are doing, sex trafficking, basically collecting all these women to be their brides to sustain their way of life. There's just not a lot compelling there, and again, the moments with Krem and Kara squaring off before they finally fight to the death at the very end of the movie, none of that screams like this is a really powerful bad guy. This is like a villain worth caring about. This comes across as like a minor villain that's in one act of a movie, not the chief big bad of an entire film. I just didn't really care for it. I thought the performance from Schoenhartz too, he's got a lot of jewelry on and he's got his hair all done up. He's a he's a cool actor. I've liked him in many things over the years, but he doesn't really have much to work with. And early on, of course, we see Krem on the other side of Ruthie after Krem kills all of her parents and family. And Ruthie, of course, is the very characteristic and tropey, headstrong young person who basically motivates the apathetic hero to take up their mantle once again, something we've seen before. I was worried that it would start to feel a little like a lone wolf and cub, Mando and Grogu type thing. It doesn't really go there. Ruthie's very independent the entire time. But that whole middle section where we finally leave like the bar planet and we go to Krem's, base of operations in a certain sense, where there's all these kind of bombed out buildings, all these people in fear of the brigands. That's where we first meet Lobo. Visually, it's very drab. A lot of the interiors are quite dark. That whole sequence, though, nothing's that special to it. I think, again, the introduction of Lobo, Momoa's been attached to Lobo hypothetically for a very long time. He expressed interest in playing Lobo when he was still, in fact, playing Aquaman in the old DCEU, of course. Cool to see Momoa return to DC so quickly. But it felt like a lot of like just Momoa being himself, that type cast that we associate with him at this point. And I don't know, it didn't really grab me the way, like, say, Channing Tatum finally playing Gambit after all those years in Deadpool and Wolverine. Like, that was something that immediately grabbed you because it was a clear spin, a comedic bend to the performance, right? This turn from Momoa as Lobo, I don't know, it just wasn't that cool. Lobo's lack of motivations and changing allegiances, there just, again, wasn't enough there. He felt shoehorned in. And, I would like a little bit more sophistication with introducing other characters you plan to reuse. I look back to Superman last year, right? The introduction of Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner, Green Lantern, and all of his cohort, Hawkgirl and Edie Gaethje's character and the like. I thought that was done pretty well, where they're in the movie in a supporting role, but also clearly established to be used later on. I don't know if the Lobo stuff worked nearly as well this time around. I think a big part of this, too, is, this film is not directed by James Gunn. Whether you like him or you dislike him, he has a flair, he has a style, he also has, just a lot of innate ability that you see whenever he makes anything. This film is directed by Craig Gillespie, who is not a bad director, but he's more of a steady studio hand who's established himself for a long time. And again, I think just, kind of visually, production-wise, nothing really wows you as you're watching the movie. I think the most interesting stuff visually actually was a lot of the flashback stuff where we go to Krypton and we see, Kara's family, David Krumholtz playing Zor-El, her dad, the brother of Superman's dad, and the white garb and stuff like that. At least that looked like an old school Krypton thing. Definitely a very different visual from, say, the beginning of Man of Steel back in the day. That being said, it's kind of straightforward flashback stuff. I think it's cool to see the aspect of Krypton that they escape with in the force field and actually living before they basically all the Kryptonians that survive get killed by the exposure to kryptonite. Solid, Of course, that really directly leads us to the sequence in Act 3 where Kara is briefly subsumed by the green sun that orbits the planet they're on, orbits around some of the time. And of course, a very classic Superman trope with being dispossessed and effectively poisoned, by your villain. Nothing we haven't seen before. But yeah, I was disappointed in the various sequences and set pieces. And again, I think the script also deserves a lot of criticism for just being, frankly, quite basic and uninspiring. And this film was written by Anna Nogueira, who is relatively inexperienced in this front, but she's been hired by Gunn not just to, of course, write this movie, which she has. She's also attached to the untitled Teen Titans film and the untitled, in development Wonder Woman film that may or may not star Adria Arjona, for all we know. A bit of an interesting choice to take someone, frankly, a little inexperienced if you look at her credits. And yeah, I think it kind of shows in the sense that this is a Supergirl film that comes across as just kind of an old school superhero entry back when anything superhero was a guaranteed hit. And you look at how Supergirl is tracking, where it's come down quite a bit. This movie has going to open to less than half of what Superman did. No one expected this to do as well as Superman, but you are burnishing a bit of that goodwill with this film coming out and then not being that good, right? I think that the critical reception is pretty poor to this movie. I'll be curious what that cinema score looks like, what the audience score looks like how people that go see the movie react to it. But on one hand, maybe it's not that big a deal because we're already getting the Superman sequel next year, and people will start to see that the universe is being built out. I guess that's fine. It's important to remember that Marvel Phase 1 and Phase 2, those were not massive movies, most of them, when they were coming out, right? This is very much on par with like the performance and quality of the early Thor movies, I would say. So yeah, I'm definitely disappointed in the movie. I don't think anything was aggressively bad, but also nothing was particularly great. Also questionable upcoming, and this is not a new thought, of course, but the next DC film coming out in the fall is the Clayface movie, and having Clayface be your third entry in the universe on the big screen remains quite the ambitious flex, so we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, Supergirl, I wish this was a lot better. That being said, I think Milly Alcock's performance as Supergirl is something you can use moving forward. I would not be shocked when we see her pop up plenty moving forward, but yeah, I'm let down by this. Let me know, though, what did you think of Supergirl if you've seen it? What did you think of this movie? And for more film reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.